This section is on the rise of the Mongol Empire. So we're going back to this whole issue of nomadic pastoralists. So remember, nomads are people who move around a lot. Pastoralists are people who focus on herding animals. So they move around a lot typically to find places for their animals to have grass to eat and to get water. So that's why they move around a lot. And they have to protect their flocks, either from other people or from predators. So remember how we talked about that there was a kind of tradition of raiding among Arabic tribes? That's not something that's exclusive to Arabs. That's something you can find in any kind of herding culture where you go raiding against other tribes. And the nomadic pastoralists, wherever they're at, typically do that. And they often learn how to use bows really well. That's a great weapon to use while raiding, right? You can shoot your enemy if they try and chase you. And it's also a great weapon to use to defend your flocks against predators like wolves. I don't want to try and go kill a wolf with a sword. I'd much rather be far away and shoot it with a bow. And of course, you can also develop, once you use bows, you can also develop them to go hunting, right? You can also use that to go hunt animals. So what you get then with nomadic pastoralists are tough people who are good with bows on horseback. That is some serious business, right? People who can ride a horse well and who can shoot a bow well are very dangerous to a soldier who is on foot. And what made the Mongols in particular very powerful was they were good enough that they could turn around and fire a bow and arrow with at you while they're running away. Right, so they could have their horse going in one direction, and if you tried to chase them, they would just be shooting arrows at you. And they were famous for faking retreats, and then people would chase them, and they just turn around and shoot a bunch of arrows at them. So, and I want to stress, right, you have to be really good at horseback riding to shoot an arrow accurately while on horseback, and you have to be really, really good to be able to do it while you're turned around. So the Mongols in particular are going to be these nomadic pastoralists who are very tough and who are good with bows on horseback, so they can hit you from a long range and are very mobile. Now, typically nomadic pastoralists, including the Mongols, will trade or raid for manufactured goods. They like things that that people who are like agriculturists make, right? They like access to good weapons. They want access to silk or to nice things like that. And they may trade, they could trade some animals from their flocks, or just like they raid each other, they may just come into your village, kill a few people, take your stuff, and leave. Now, usually they're at a tribal level of organization, so they're not too dangerous on their own, right? If they decide to try and keep a village, the Imperial Army will come in and kick them out or whatever. But sometimes they'll be unified into a powerful leader sometimes they'll be unified by a powerful leader into like a confederation, a collection of tribes. And then they're pretty dangerous because then there's a bunch of them. But there's limitation to this unity because eventually what's going to happen is they will split apart along tribal lines. A tribe, you may unify tribes A, B, C, and D, and then you fight, but then tribe D is angry because they think they fought really well, but you didn't give them enough treasure after you won the fight, so they may leave. Tribe B might be upset because they feel like tribe C wasn't pulling their weight, but you gave them an equal share or something like that. So the problem is, from the point of view of those who would unify the tribes, is people's loyalty is generally to their tribe, and so they'll stay in a unification, they'll stay in a confederation as long as it benefits their tribe. If it doesn't seem to do so, they'll just leave. And that's good for the people around them because it means that the confederations don't last long and they won't be conquered. Now, in the case of the Mongols, though, they're going to have this genius leader named Genghis Khan or Chinggis Khan, or his birth name was Temujin. We're going to call him Genghis Khan because that's what he was typically known as in the West, and we're in the West. But he is going to rise up and basically unify the Mongols. And he does this for a variety of reasons. First of all, he's a very charismatic leader. People, they meet him, they're impressed by him. He's clearly very smart. He knew how to reward loyal followers. He was a great leader of men and women. He was a great soldier. He knew how to take care of his soldiers and his followers and so forth. So he just inspired confidence in people. People were willing to follow him, give the guy a chance. He also used mounted horsemen effectively, right? He knew how to use the advantages that the Mongols had with their fast horses and with their ability to fire bows from horseback. He knew how to use them very well. He was a very good general. Now, the thing is, that's kind of par for the course. Anyone who unified the Mongols for a time into a tribal confederation were able to do that. But one thing that Genghis Khan did differently was he engaged in merit-based promotion. Typically in the past, people had been promoted based on whether or not they were part of a powerful tribe. So if there was a powerful tribe and you wanted to keep them in your confederacy, you had to give their tribal leaders a high position in the army or else they would leave. And Genghis Khan said, I'm not going to do that. I don't care what tribe you're part of. If you know what you're doing, I'm going to promote you. And he was charismatic enough that he could get away with this. He was able to keep people following him, and people that complained about this, he was tough enough he could just defeat them or scare them. So he was able to do this effectively and was able to basically make sure that people who were loyal and knew what they were doing were in charge instead of people who were maybe not loyal because they were promoted because of their tribe, so they were more loyal to their tribe, and maybe they didn't know what they were doing. So he found guys who would be loyal to him and who knew what they were doing, and he put them in charge. He also broke up old tribal organizations and built new ones. So remember, that was one problem with the tribal confederacies, is that, tribe A, B, C, and D will stick with the confederacy as long as it's good for their tribe. As soon as it stops being good for their tribe, they'll just leave. But what he did, when he conquered you, or when you joined with him, he would split up your groups and mix them in with other tribes. So he mixed up the tribes as in his army. So he wouldn't have like an army only made up of people of one tribe. It'd be made up of people of multiple tribes. And there'd be another army made up of people of the same tribes. So he would split up people. So that way the tribe didn't exist as a unit and therefore could not just leave the confederacy as a unit. And this had the effect of making people's loyalty primarily to him and to his empire rather than to their tribe. One thing also that's very interesting is that he was a follower of Tengri. Tengri was the Mongol god of the sky, and Genghis Khan and other Mongols believed that Tengri wanted them to conquer everything covered by the sky, which is everything. Curiously, though, even though he believed he was literally on a mission from God, the sky god, he was fairly tolerant in terms of religion. The Mongols are not going to try and force people to follow their religion. Now, he's very successful conqueror. He's got these fearsome warriors. They're going to conquer so much of the world that's actually too big and it has to be divided. And I need to show you the map to see what I'm talking about, right? Mongolia's up in here, right? Here's Mongolia. And they're going to conquer China. They'll eventually conquer Korea. They're going to conquer Central Asia. They're going to conquer Persia, much of the Middle East, and modern day Russia. I mean, this is huge empire, much too large for one person to run. So eventually it will be divided. But Genghis Khan is the one that gets this started and is going to lead to this gigantic empire, which it will be divided. But for this moment in the 13th and into the 14th century, much of the world will be actually ruled by Mongols, who start off as a collection of tribes of nomadic pastoralists. So it's pretty astounding, and it says something about the genius of Genghis Khan that he could pull this off. Now, there's a lot of positive aspects of Mongol rule that we should note. They did manage to maintain security over a large empire. We talked about a Pax Romana, a Roman peace that allowed for people to enjoy peace and stability. Well, you've also got a Pax Mongolia, right? A Mongol peace, because they conquer all these different areas. They're able to put a stop to war in those areas. That's really good. That leads to increased trade, right? Merchants can safely travel. If we go back to this map, you may have heard of Marco Polo. He's going to travel across this area. And what made his travels possible was the Mongol peace, right? It would have been very difficult otherwise to do this. You also have, now that we have peace, we have people moving back and forth between these different places. You have communication and the sharing of culture. That's great. And like I said, these are religiously tolerant people. This is the Mongol ruler over an Islamic area, and he is going to be tolerant of Islam, right? They're not going to come in and try and force people to follow Tengri, the sky god. Now, the question, of course, is these are great things, but there's also this issue, was this worth the cost? It's estimated that something like 10 million people died in the conquests. And considering the population of human beings in this time period, that's a lot of people, right? We talk about how World War I was so devastating for Europeans. They lost about 10 million people, not just Europeans, but also people from Asia and Africa as well as the Americas were killed in that war. We talk about how 10 million people was bad then. There was a lot more people then. But 10 million people in the 13th century, that's really bad. So it's important, with history, there's usually positive and negative aspects. And there were definitely positive aspects from the Mongol capital perspective. But I wonder what the people who they conquered when the conquering was going on would have thought, right? The Mongols just went out and conquered because they could, right? They went and invaded these other areas because they could. They didn't necessarily have a good reason to. It's not that these other people wronged them necessarily. So yeah, this question, this was pretty heavy. This is pretty expensive. There's positive aspects, but they didn't come for free. And one thing I just want to point out, we talked about the Islamic Golden Age. The year given typically for its ending is in the 13th century when the Mongols took Baghdad and destroyed the House of Wisdom. So like I say, it's kind of a mixed legacy.